Catherine, we're ready. Can you hear me, Catherine?
I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, so we're ready to go.
All right, then. I'm going to call to order the May 23rd, 2023 meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Fire and Police Disability Retirement Fund. Let's begin with, I think, consent items on the calendar, if that's correct. The only consent item I see is approval of the minutes from the April 4th, 23 meeting. Does anybody have any questions or comments they want to make about those minutes? Okay, not hearing any. I need a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, and do I have a second? I'm having a hard time hearing there.
Got his mic
Okay.
going on. I'm not hearing it.
Can you hear me? There we go. That seems to be a little better. Okay.
But,
Second.
all right, then, all in favor of accepting the minutes, say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All right, prior minutes are accepted. Let's move on to introduction of visitors. Do people just want to go around the rooms or online? You'll know better than I who's present.
Lauren, you want to start? We'll start with Lauren.
Sure. Lauren Nellenhauer with Wichita Deacon, outside legal counsel for the fund.
Jake Winship, Oregon PERS, and actuarial manager.
Aaron Martin with Independent Actuaries Incorporated, actuaries.
In the back?
Kevin Matches, resident.
Okay.
Del Stevens, I'm a retired deputy chief, year 2002, and I've stayed active in pension issues, and I'm very interested in what's going on today.
Stacy Jones, FPDR's pension and finance manager. Kimberly Mitchell, FPDR disability claims manager. Julie Hall, legal assistant.
I think that's everybody in the room except for me, Sam, director. We got online Franco, you're online.
Franco Luchin, Senior Deputy City Attorney, Counsel for FPDR.
Okay, thank you and welcome everyone. Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the time for in-person public comments and that we have a couple.
Correct.
Yeah, correct, we do. The first person will be Del Stevens, and then followed by Kevin Matches.
Thank you. Welcome, Del.
Good afternoon, Mr. Stevens. You have 3 minutes for public comment, and you will see the counter will be on the Zoom team meeting if you'd like to watch that. Thank you.
The audio is a little bit vague for me, and maybe I have a disability. I'm not sure, but I'm having trouble understanding the volume and the actual wording. But
Is it too loud for you?
no, it's not. It's not too loud. It just is not distinct. It's blurred. Does anybody else notice this also?
I think
Maybe it's an individual problem. I'm sorry.
It might be, is there
I'm trying to follow closely, though.
there is some prompting here.
Yes, I understand. Well, I would like to start by saying that I'm pleased to be here today. I've been retired 21 years, but I have a lot of affection for the Fire Bureau, and I have tried to follow the issues that the members, active and retired, are still concerned with. And one of the issues was about 2 years ago, there was a proposal to have a committee that would examine benefits for our retired members. And that never actually occurred. The proposal was talked about, but because of the fact of the COVID epidemic that started, we had no more public meetings. And I just would like, if like to find out if that proposal was active then, is it supported now? And should we not appoint a committee and carry on with that process?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to make a general comment here that we're a bit at a disadvantage today in that we're without a committee chair and another trustee on the board. And so I think that makes discussion about, any ongoing administrative topic a little bit more troublesome, in that I'm personally not as comfortable having, discussions about meaty issues potentially with a reduced board present. So just with that general comment, would the other trustees like to respond to Dell's comment here initially about his interest in creating that committee that got sidetracked?
I guess my only comment would be, I think that committee, or at least the idea for that committee, was formed prior to my time as a trustee. And maybe if it did get derailed, it'd be worth maybe getting some historical information on the idea of having a committee to examine the benefits is reasonable, but I don't have the history personally in my position. It might be worthwhile either at the next meeting or some point between now and the next meeting getting some of that history.
Am I on here? Yeah, it's great. Okay, couple months ago, I had sent you all the board, a big packet of information, which included the background information, all the board meeting minutes on the prior discussions for the committee or the task force. So you should have that there. If you need me to resend it, let me know, because it has quite a bit of background and quite a bit of discussion on that on what had happened and what had been discussed. And so nothing outside of the board meetings was not discussed outside the board meetings.
I'll check my emails. Thanks.
Okay, and just email me back or give me a call and I'll resend that email. So it was pretty heavy amount of information, but I wanted to make sure you got the full and complete meeting minutes of everything that was discussed for probably about 4 or 5 board meetings.
Mm-hmm. Trustee Culp, do you have any thoughts about this?
I do not. I did receive that email and I did review it. I'll go back and look at it again before I speak more intelligently on it.
Okay. I might add a couple more comments. At the time, there was that discussion, I think, had initially surfaced relating to a prior presentation of the equal to or better than test results from several years ago, and discussion about the concepts of service versus disability retirement and the fact that they both are not defined in this plan, whereas they are or maybe in the PERS plans. And then there were some generalized questions about just overall retirement benefits relating to tier 2 PERS. And I'm aware of some questions about non-spouse beneficiaries, et cetera, for retirement. So those were kind of the miscellaneous things that have been bandied about. I'd be happy to suggest we put this in as a future board meeting agenda topic, preferably for when we have a full board, so that we can get others' perspective on it besides the 3 of us, and get some leadership from a chair that is more familiar with the city and the charter and those kinds of issues more so than I may be. So that would be my first thought, is that we put it in as a future agenda topic. And that also, I prefer that this Board of Trustees, which is really more administrative in nature, doesn't try and take the full burden of anticipating what a few members, albeit ones that have been regularly participating in this and have a strong interest, but maybe that other solicitation be made to get the police and fire employees and or retiree groups to participate and maybe do some of the legwork on issues of concern or suggestions or those kinds of things. Meaning, I'd like it to not be just a committee of this couple of board members and a couple of retirees, but we need to understand that any discussions we had, if they were intended to go anywhere productive, should have some broader membership involvement. So, any other thoughts along those lines? Okay, then Mr. Stevens, I'll thank you for your comments and do we want to make any kind of recommendation to include this as a future board agenda topic?
I would like to make another comment. If in fact it is agreed upon to establish a task force, I would ask that you include some retired members who have an interest and a background, because there's a lot of retired members that are struggling right now. As you're aware, the inflation rate is over 9%, and the COLA that we're allowed as retired members is only 2%. Our members are losing their buying power, and particularly it hits widows harder because they've already ended up with only half of what their member was receiving. And so to me, it's a very important issue, and I hope that the board will want to address it and want to include some divergent viewpoints, because equity, as I noted in your past minutes, is considered in everything you do. And certainly retired members deserve equity as well. Thank you very much.
Points well made. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Matches, if you're ready to give your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Matches. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Kevin Matches, and I'm here to address questions that came up at the April 4 board meeting regarding Actuarial Standard of Practice number 4. My public comment for that meeting notified the board of an inconsistency between ASOP number 4 and a memo from staff describing a proposed contract with a value in excess of $300,000. Specifically, any levy adequacy analysis would constitute a funding valuation as defined by ASOP number 4. In response, a seeming chorus of voices reassured board members that I had somehow misinterpreted ASOP number 4 and declared that a levy adequacy analysis would not meet the definition of a funding valuation. These declarations glaringly omitted any reference to the actual definition that could be found in ASOP number 4. The definition of a funding valuation is one sentence long, and it does not provide any loopholes through which a levy adequacy analysis could escape. Instead, it was insinuated that my views on an unrelated policy somehow biased me and led to my alleged misinterpretation. First, I object to that type of insinuation. It was unreasonable, unfair, and irrelevant to the decision that was before the board. I hope that going forward, everyone in these meetings can leave all personal comments at the door and stick to discussing policy. Second, since it was brought up, I'll address the possibility that my conclusion regarding ASOP number 4 was incorrect due to some bias. I can tell you that this is impossible. How can I be so confident of this? I've spoken to 3 actuaries who are experts in public plans that agreed that the levy adequacy analysis would meet the definition of a funding valuation. One of them submitted a request for guidance from a member through the Actuarial Board for Counseling and Discipline. The guidance was that the levy adequacy analysis indeed appeared to be a funding valuation as defined by ASOP number 4. Therefore, ASOP number 4 would impact future funding valuations. I quickly notified your actuaries at Milliman on April 27. Consequently, ASOP number 4 directs that when performing a funding valuation, the actuary should also calculate and disclose a reasonable actuarially determined contribution. I hope it's now clear that the board was being presented with mistaken facts leading up to its decision. And finally, I want to point out that I don't view what transpired at the last board meeting to be an isolated incident. I've observed a pattern regarding what's tolerated at these meetings, and I hope that everyone who attends will do what they can to ensure these meetings turn a new leaf and embrace a culture of transparency.
Thank you, Ms. Matches. I'm sorry that you felt that the style in the room was not open to receiving comments. I hadn't felt that myself personally, but I apologize if you felt that way from either members of the board or from others who were presenting. I did not feel like we received information that was biased in terms of the understanding of the actuarial standards of practice number 4. But if you have received information from other actuaries to the contrary, and you've provided that to the Milliman actuaries, and you can share that information with us, we'd be happy to receive that and take that into consideration.
So to be clear, only actuaries can submit those requests for guidance. And I'm not a member of any of the 5 actuarial organizations.
That's not what I meant. You indicated that you had reached out to 3 other actuaries and that they had provided you their opinions, and one, in fact, had reached out to the actual Board of Counseling Discipline and requested some guidance with respect to that. If you can share the specifics of that information with us that you'd like us to take into account, that would be helpful. And did you receive a response from Milliman when you provided them that feedback?
I'd like to follow up a comment here. If you have any questions or concerns with what is happening, what Milliman has done or the board has done, please route those either through me and I'll just spend it out. Milliman is employed by us and we contract them, so we need to be in control of that contract and what is done. Because the time you spend with them gets billed to us and they have to defend stuff, and we have to be part of that defense. We have to be part of the understanding of what the issue is. So that should be coming through us, since we are the contractee or the contractor for Milliman. Okay?
And that makes sense. So my questions to the presenter here, or speaker, about this information that he requested and obtained, if you can provide that to FPD and our staff so that they can review that and disseminate that to us as well, that would be helpful.
I mean, everything I have, I just shared in my public comment. That's exactly what I have.
And what I'm trying to get at is those are your statements about what you've done. I'm just looking for documentation with relating to that.
I don't have documentation. I'm not an actuary. I'm not a member of any of the 5 actual organizations, and only one of those members can submit a request for guidance.
I appreciate that. I simply meant that you said you spoke with people and shared that information with others, and I was just looking for specifics about who those individuals were and what their comments were specifically. So otherwise, it's just vague information that you're telling us, which is contrary to information we received in formal comments at the last meeting. So just have to kind of put everything in perspective. Did any of the other trustees have comments or questions about this?
I don't recall any personal attacks on you at any time, or anybody referring to you as being biased. I think I was very open to the information you gave. I said you're obviously intelligent and spoke intelligently on the topic, but nobody had any sort of personal attacks on you or referred to you as being biased or having something like that. I don't know where that information came from. I don't recall any of that.
And I would second that, and I apologize if it did come across as it was not a fair shake. You're not getting good, not being experts in actuarial practices. You brought up some information, and we asked for clarification from our experts, and it's contrary to what the information you just were talking about in your public comments. So I would second what Catherine had said. If there is any information that you received from talking to those 3 actuarials that you then brought to the light at Milliman, I would just like to be able to evaluate that as well. I don't have the ability to take the information you just presented and really put that through a filter of knowledge of actuarial skills and practices. It's not what I do. I'm a firefighter. So I'm happy to continue to look into the information and the accusations or that you are presenting, but we need to have some sort of concrete information to look at so I know what it is you're asserting so we can then move forward, if that makes sense.
I mean, what I would say is I'm not an authority on this matter, right? The actual Board for Counseling and Discipline is the authority.
Yeah, I'm not an authority either, but I'm happy to take some more information if you can provide it to me or to us, to the board.
I don't have anything else to provide,
Okay.
right? It's you'd have to go to that ABCD to get that right.
Okay, thank you.
Right, thank you for your comments. All right, are there any other public comments at this time?
There will be more public comment after the ETOB presentation. At this moment, we're finished.
Okay, well then I think we're ready to move to the action items, and the first one is the discussion of the equal to or better than test results. And I'll turn that back over to Sam. to present those.
I'd like to introduce Aaron Reardon from Independent Actuaries, and I'm going to just miss his name here right now. But Jake Winthrop, apologies, from PERS. They're both here to answer the questions and go over the questions and answers they had sent out to you that are in the board handbook. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to them.
Thank you. Should I?
Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Jake Winship. As mentioned, I represent Oregon PERS, and we contracted the analysis of equal to or better than, but my colleague performed the analysis, and he will take the lead in this discussion, and I will support however I can.
Thank you, Jake. Board, I'm glad to be here. My name is Aaron Riordan, and I work with a Lake Oswego firm called Independent Actuaries Incorporated, and we were hired by PERS to perform the equal to or better than test. I was provided a list of questions from Sam Hutchison, and I prepared written comments. Those have been entered into the record. I thought maybe a good way to go about this would be to step through each of the questions, and I'll read it and then read my answer. And if there's any additional questions, we can go into that. I may have misunderstood the intent of the question, so this is your opportunity to get some more details if needed. So I'll start with some questions that were from Trustee Kyle McLaury. And the letter from Jake Winship, this is part of the PERS board procedures, I guess. In the second to last paragraph regarding the two-step process, it appears that the first step, which compares a pay-as-you-go system to a prepaid pension system, in addition to a 2.8% versus a 2% defined benefit, FPDR will never fail the equal to or better than test. And this is a letter from Jake to the members of the PERS board from July 22nd, talking about the then in process testing. So my comment is that in the two-step process, our first step is a comparison between the PERS full formula benefit and an employer plan with a defined benefit design like Portland's. The OAR, the rules state that whether the benefits are provided by trust should not be part of the determination, and that's where I'm addressing the pay-as-you-go versus a prepaid pension system. And I agree that if all other provisions are equal, a plan with a 2.8% benefit would never fail the ETOB test when compared with the PERS full formula 2% benefit. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Can you clarify? It says that whether the benefits are provided by trust. Is that what is that? What is that referring to? What does that mean?
So there are two main ways of providing benefits to retirees. One would be that you set aside money ahead of time in trust, and that money is protected, and it's only used for the purposes of paying benefits when those people retire.
The prepaid system.
Exactly. So the pay-as-you-go system would be where there are no assets set aside ahead of time, and simply from the general assets, benefits are paid as they come due. So part of the ETOB test, part of the rules state that the manner in which the benefits are funded, are paid for, is not part of the consideration.
Okay.
Okay. But before we go on to the next question, just a couple clarifying things about this first one. In addition to the formula, so the 2.8 versus 2.0% per year of service, I mean, there are other things that go into the benefit for comparability, and that would include like the salary or compensation applied to that, and whether there's maximum years of service. So in looking at this, I presume that those are non-issues, or were those, I take it those were taken into consideration, is what I want to say. Is if one plan were, a final 5-year compensation average applied versus the other one that was a final single-year compensation applied, or if one had a maximum years of service of 20 years and the other had maximum of 30 years, those could create a different result from this.
Yes, I agree. There are any number of plan features which affect the value of the benefit, and we did compare and take into consideration all of the plan features, with the exception of some certain features which are specifically excluded from consideration. That would be something like the Social Security, adjustments, and a few other things that are specifically excluded from the test.
Okay.
I want to make sure I understand Catherine's point. Excuse me, Trustee McLeod. If you're doing a side-by-side comparison, it doesn't matter if someone is a 5-year or at their full level of pension. Side-by-side is side-by-side. The one who's doing PERS is full pension, and then if you want to do a 5-year comparison, that's going to be 5 years for both sides. Unless I'm not understanding exactly what Trustee McLeod was just saying.
I'll clarify. What I was trying to say is, yes, on the surface, if you have one plan which has a benefit formula of 2.8% per year of service times compensation as the benefit, and the other is 2.0, well, 2.8 is obviously higher. So as this question answers, it will obviously not fail if the only difference between the plan is one was 2.8% per year of service and the other is 2.0. But the other things that can come into play are the age at which that benefit is payable, the compensation that's applied to that per year of service benefit. And if one of the plans had a maximum year of service credit and the other one didn't, for example, those were the kinds of things. So strictly 2.8 versus 2.0, I would agree on the surface, 2.8 is bigger. But I'm just trying to get into the discussion that there are other variables and have it addressed that those were all taken into account.
Okay.
Should I continue with the next? Okay. The next part said, please say more about the discussion surrounding the implicit subsidy associated with post-retirement medical benefits. And this is still part of the comments in the letter from Jake to the PERS board. So I'll read the reply first. An implicit subsidy exists when retirees are allowed to remain on the active health plan, even if they pay the full premium amount. This is because the premium itself does not represent the full cost of covering these retirees. Since they're older than the active population, retirees can be expected to generate higher medical claims than the average claims of the mostly active employee population. If an employer pays a large percentage of the premium amount for active employees, the employer is considered to be providing an implicit benefit to the retirees, because payment of premiums related to the active employees subsidizes the cost of covering retirees. The only retiree medical benefit provided under PERS is a $60 monthly stipend applied to PERS-sponsored Medicare supplemental insurance. The value of the PERS benefit is quite small compared to the implicit benefit provided to FPDR retirees. Since we determined that the FPDR benefits were substantially more valuable than PERS without considering any implicit subsidy, we have not reflected any consideration of implicit subsidy in our comparison between PERS and FPDR. So that was a lot of words, but basically we're saying that without considering this additional benefit, this implicit subsidy, we already found that the FPDR retirement benefits were more valuable.
Would you not take in consideration when the health plans are being renewed each year through the city, that they know the retirees are on their health plan and they are assuming that risk through the premiums that are generated each year?
And if I may, Aaron, my understanding of this is, yes, that is taken into consideration. This is actually related to any selection associated with the retiree benefit. So presumably, we would anticipate, because it is a relatively substantial benefit, that members in relatively poor health that would incur higher than expected costs, there would be a benefit to them by having this availability. There's basically an optionality. Rather than attempt to quantify the value of that option for a poor health retiree to receive this subsidy, we directed independent actuaries to disregard it. So essentially, we were treating that option value as zero, which is more conservative. So the value without any sort of option value to select that is already well in excess of the PERS health insurance plan, PHIP, that would be available. Therefore, we did not need to quantify that. It was already well in excess with the Portland FPDR plan in comparison to PERS, if that helps clarify.
Sure, yeah, thank you.
And so let me just say it in different words, that had you valued this implicit subsidy benefit, the gap between the FPDR valued benefit would have been even greater than the PERS valued benefit. Is that what you're saying?
That's my belief.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I can confirm that. That's true.
Thank you.
Moving on, the next bullet, the following paragraph in the letter talks about the employee pickup. The question is, do I assume that it is not relevant to FPDR as only step one of the process was utilized? And that's correct. And the discussion of the employee pickup, it's only relevant for plans with mandatory employee contributions. It is a term that has a specific U.S. federal taxation meaning, and it would be considered an employer-provided benefit. For FPDR, mandatory employee contributions only applied prior to 7/1/1990, and there are only 5 employees in the census which was provided to us with a date of hire prior to that. So we did not investigate whether FPDR mandatory employee contributions should be considered pickup contributions. And again, that is only something that would have increased the value of the FPDR benefits, since that would be considered an employer-provided benefit.
Right, and I think that as you read this, the connotation for me for employer pickup is IAP related. I think in my language, that's 6% is an employer pickup. So I think I was understanding that in a different context. So.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. And we weren't comparing to IAP.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on. So now the questions were specifically about our report that was provided. And in the methodology section, which is in the report, that is a different page number. It's page 2 of the report, in case you're looking in the report itself. Define level of service retirement. I assume it is promotion related, but not sure how they compare classifications. So in our report, the term service retirement does not relate to promotions. Rather, it means retirement from service after attaining required age and service. The other kind of retirement that is considered under the ETOB test is a retirement due to disability. So I did hear some comments earlier from Ms. McLeod, and maybe that's why there's a question about this particular term. In the test, we only considered 2 kinds of retirement. One is retirement from active service after you've reached whatever the requirements are, and the other is a retirement due to disability.
Make sense?
So moving on, please explain what, if any, additional actuarial assumptions were used.
In bullet 4.
Yes, yes. So in the letter from Jake to the PERS board, we discussed some additional actuarial assumptions. Oh, sorry, not in the letter, in our report, that we might develop some actuarial assumptions which were not specifically listed in the Oregon rules. Because FPDR is directly comparable to PERS, there are no assumptions needed for comparison of different types of benefits. In some cases where detail was not available, we made assumptions that would err on the side of increasing the value of the PERS benefits. As an example, since the FPDR consideration of unused sick leave and the determination of pension benefits was not directly addressed in the SPD or the valuation reports we received, we made the conservative assumption that FPDR retirement and disability benefits do not consider unused sick leave. So in general, we did not have to make any assumptions when comparing PERS and FPDR. But when we did, it would be something like this, where it was, again, an assumption that would not change the outcome of the test. If we had assumed the opposite, that would have made it more likely that, the FPDR benefits would be, now I'm getting turned around. It would increase the value of, it would increase the value of the FPDR benefit if we assumed that sick leave was reflected. Can we give a brief summary of the full formula calculation method? The PERS full formula method of calculating retirement and disability benefit, whether Tier 1, Tier 2, or OPSERP, is determined by multiplying a percentage, 2% for Tier 1 and Tier 2, and 1.8% for OPSERP, by years of service by average monthly compensation. And the average monthly compensation is based on the final 3 years of employment.
Yep.
And that is the benefit that we were comparing.
The defined benefit.
Yep. The question is, where is Social Security represented on the balance of the scale with this methodology? To my knowledge, all other Oregon firefighters calculate Social Security into their retirement. And the response is simply that the ETOB test states that we may not consider Social Security benefits or participation.
So I understand that that is directed by that statute. It's just simple. I mean, it seems sensible that that's something that every other firefighter or police officer in the state is counting as part of their retirement. That could be somehow folded into the evaluation, or at least the comparison. But I guess I understand that that's what the statement is in the administrative rule.
Yes, and I may speak to that a little bit. That was part of PERS direction to independent actuaries. That wasn't an item mentioned. And we did have discussion from PERS perspective. each individual employer may elect to participate in Social Security or not at their discretion. So our treatment in other contexts as well is to make the assumption that the alternative selected by an employer would be the same should they be a member of PERS as it is not in PERS. Therefore, if they have the election to be part of PERS and not participate in Social Security. If they were required, the wording would be different. But because we have that, the OAR specifically excludes consideration of Social Security benefits and participation in that program. And so that's direction from our legal department at PERS.
And that holds for all ETOB tests around the state, not just for Portland.
That is correct. Every plan subject to ETOB evaluation is subject to the same rules.
And may I make sure I'm understanding your comment about that again correctly? Are you saying that the interpretation is that an organization's decision to be part of PERS versus their own programs such as FPDR would not be determined based on whether or not, well, I'm going to say it differently. Their decision whether or not to participate in Social Security benefits would be independent of their decision to participate in PERS or another program.
That's correct, because
out of the consideration, you're saying that you've assumed for purposes of this test that that's a separate decision that would not be impacted by their decision to be in PERS or another program.
that is correct. And just to avoid ambiguity, that's why the administrative rule was modified to explicitly exclude consideration of Social Security benefits. But that is the reasoning behind it, that because a plan can participate in PERS and simultaneously not participate in Social Security, we did not wish to value the option selected.
Thank you for clarifying.
So moving on, the next question is about bullets 9 and 10 from our report, and I'll read those two bullets. This is talking about the methodology we use in the test. Our comparison does not value the transfer of investment risk and mortality risk between employee and employer inherent in the plan design differences of defined benefit and defined contribution plans. And the bullet 10, our comparison does not include increases to retirement benefits under certain statutes of Oregon. So bullet 9 is not applicable to the comparison between PERS and FPDR because both plans use a defined benefit design. In a defined contribution plan, the employee typically bears all investment risk, while the value of this risk could be considered in comparison of benefits provided by plans of differing design, defined benefit versus defined contribution. The subjectivity of such a consideration makes its inclusion in the ETOB test problematic. So because PERS is a defined benefit design and FPDR is also, bullet 9 doesn't really apply. That would be talking about the value of investment risk or mortality risk and trying to compare a defined contribution design plan with something that's defined benefit like PERS.
Can we drill down on this one just for a moment?
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not an expert on this, but the defined contribution is a part of the PERS pension, am I correct?
It is a part of certain types of the plan, but those parts of the PERS plan were not considered. So I think maybe you're thinking of the individual account plan.
I am, most definitely.
Right. And that's not part of our testing.
And I would like to drill down on that decision a little bit, if I could, because it doesn't make any sense. to me. It's, I guess the wording here is that inclusion of that is problematic. And as I understand it, this sort of trying to figure out, I guess, what the value of someone's IAP in 30 years or 25 years is problematic. But I think isn't that sort of part of the job description as an actuarial to try and project something like that? Would then be part of the actuarial or the value of a pension for someone who's in PERS, whether it's tier 2 or tier 3?
And I'm afraid that this is another case where the Oregon rules actually state that only the full formula money match and the formula plus annuity and OPSERP benefits are part of the testing.
So you are restricted by the ORS or the rules for this testing to only do the defined benefit portions.
Only the defined benefit portion of PERS.
Of PERS.
But there are some employers that have defined contribution
Okay.
designs.
Okay, thanks.
So bullet 10, which was talking about increases to the retirement benefits, that is a rule that requires police and fire pension benefit increases to match some PERS benefit increases for participants who pay Oregon personal income tax, and that those increases are also explicitly excluded from the test. Moving on, in the report, paragraph 3 and 4, and this is in the test results section. It says both paragraphs 3 and 4 seem to dismiss the disability portion of the FPDR benefit. And this is one where it might be helpful to talk about the question. I'm not sure if I answered it in the way that you were expecting. So paragraph 3 says, only the benefits provided under FPDR2 are relevant to the ETOB test, since no members of FPDR1 are active as of the testing date, December 31st, 2020, and members of FPDR3 are covered by OPSERP with additional benefits provided by the City of Portland, and by definition are receiving benefits equal to or better than those provided by PERS. So that's what our paragraph 3 says. And I've tried to restate that here. I'm not sure. And I believe that members of FPDR3, the additional benefits are additional disability benefits. So since they're already receiving OPSERP benefits, the additional benefits means that they'll pass automatically. So we're only looking at FPDR2. And we do discuss disability benefits. In the table, which is following these two paragraphs, we discuss a side-by-side comparison of the disability benefits between FPDR2 and PERS. So please let me know if that wasn't what you're getting at.
Maybe we'll get back to it. Thanks.
Oh, okay. The next question, under covered compensation, what bonus is being referred to in addition to salary? And in our comparison, the bonus refers to any increase in salary rates due to premium pay. So in general, I believe bonuses are not considered in the FPDR benefits, but when we refer to bonus, that's what we're talking about, increases due to premium pay.
Premium pay is part of the FPDR, salary.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just clarifying bonus because I didn't know what that meant in your terminology. Thank you.
Okay, so let's see. over pages 102 and 3, whereas IAP added into comparison, I think we already discussed that the Oregon administrative rule actually specifically excludes the IAP.
Right, and this may not be the time for this, maybe something for further discussion with the board, but it does seem that, and I understand you're doing exactly what you're contracted to do, but as far as the value to the membership who are receiving these benefits, to leave out the IEP, it almost renders this test, without being harsh, almost meaningless, in a sense, because that is such a large viable portion of someone's pension. And I'm thinking more about the people that I know in OPSERP. I'm more in tune with that IEP, and I know I'm not as familiar with the PERS Tier 2 version of the IEP, but it is something that goes back to the FPDR reform of 2006 and 7. There's a lot of discussion of how that portion of the pension was going to be the added piece that would make it worthwhile for the police and fire to move out of FPDR into OPSERP as their pension. So that is just something I wanted to touch on for the record. That could be something that can be discussed later, but it was something that I noticed and was very curious of why it was not part of this test. And I'm understanding now it's the way that it was structured and the way that you are governed by the restrictions of the administrative rules. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
The next set of questions were questions that were from the FPDR staff. Question 1, walk through the test requirements, namely that A, total FPDR benefits be at least 100% of the value of total PERS benefits. So I'll stop there and answer. So when considering the aggregate retirement, disability, and post-retirement health care, the employer benefit must be shown to be more valuable than PERS, and I provide the rule. So in the test, we look at all of the benefits, the retirement and disability and post-retirement health care, and when you consider those categories, the aggregate benefit must be at least 100% of what is provided by PERS. Moving on, the FPDR service retirement benefits must be at least 80% of the value of PERS service retirement benefits.
I'm sorry. Can I interrupt real quick?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Just back to that last point. You talked about the aggregate retirement, disability, and post-retirement health care. How is the disability folded into that equation?
When we do the testing, we didn't do this when we were comparing FPDR and PERS, but we would have assumptions about how often a person becomes disabled and how often a person becomes retired and what benefits are due to them at that time. And
So, but you didn't do that for this test?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So there are two main categories of PERS, of retirement benefit that are considered in this test. One is a retirement from active service with post-retirement health care. And the other benefit is the retirement due to disability with post-retirement health care. So when only considering the retirement from active service with health care, those benefits provided by the employer must be at least 80% of the value of that provided by PERS. And then the last part of this question is asking about benefits for retirement with disability, and the question is FPDR benefits for retirement after disability be at least 80% of the value of the equivalent PERS benefit. So this is saying that when you look at the disability benefit with post-retirement medical, those benefits must be at least 80% of the value of that provided by PERS. So altogether, when you add them all up, must be 100%. If you're looking at just service retirement, it has to be at least 80%. If you're looking at just disability or retirement, that has to be at least 80%. And our side-by-side comparison showed that in each of the above areas, FPDR is unambiguously more valuable.
Mr. Raridan, and is that 80% analysis minimum benefit analysis, is that on a per member basis, or is that for the plan as a whole?
That's a great question. It is not on a per member basis. It is all members considered together.
Okay.
And when we talk about those members, the next question, we'll touch on this a little bit. The next question says, explain the testing process in a bit of detail. For example, do they take a subset of PERS employees and pretend they're FPDR employees to calculate the benefits that person would receive if covered by FPDR, and then compare that to the real PERS benefits? So the Oregon administrative rules state that a hypothetical member data should be used. And we have used a hypothetical census, which is based on the PERS police officer and firefighter data used in the 12/31/2020 PERS valuation. Because our side-by-side comparison revealed that the only PERS provisions which might be more valuable than FPDR are the amount of overtime, unused sick leave, and vacation time that are reflected in retirement and disability benefits, we only used the hypothetical data to evaluate the significance of these differences in the plan provisions. For example, based on the hypothetical census, we estimated the average police officer and firefighter amount of overtime pay that would be considered under PERS, and we applied a corresponding reduction to FPDR benefits because of the fact that overtime pay is not considered. Question moving on, what does the test include and exclude? For example, does it consider taxability of benefits, post-retirement healthcare benefits, level and type of plan funding? So in my answer, I point out that a couple of those are specifically excluded through the rules. The taxability of benefits is excluded, and the way the plan is funded is excluded. Post-retirement healthcare benefits are included. But one way that you can see a quick listing of what we have included and excluded for consideration is in our report. And in the methodology section, we list the items that were considered. We considered the level of service retirement and disability benefits, so that would be the percentage. Early retirement subsidies, the definition of the covered compensation, mandatory employee contributions, the normal form of payment, and optional forms of payment that are available, cost of living adjustments, and then the amount of explicit and implicit post-retirement medical benefits. So this is from our report, and it is page 2 of the report, but I believe that was probably, if you're looking at the aggregate provided in your questions, Mr. McLeod, page 100 out of 352.
Got it, thank you. Yep.
Just to clarify again, then in your example, your discussion of the things that the OER require be not be considered in the testing, you talk about taxation of benefits. So again, if in the FPDR plan, benefits paid at retirement for those who left service due to disability, if they are taxed under the FPDR plan but are not taxed through PERS, that differential would be ignored, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Moving on, the next question, do you require FPDR to have the same benefit features as PERS? And the answer is no. The test considers the actuarial present value of benefits, not individual plan features. So we do look at the plan as a whole, but as I mentioned before, when comparing side by side, there are only 3 types of features that could potentially be more valuable under PERS. The next question, how do you compare FPDR pension benefits and PERS pension benefits when they are not exactly equivalent? For example, FPDR pensions have a higher accrual rate, 2.8%, than PERS, but FPDR final pay does not include overtime, whereas PERS final pay does. Another example is the fact that the PERS pension is a hybrid benefit, part defined benefit and part defined contribution, which is inherently riskier for the employee. How do you conduct these apples to oranges comparisons? As I've mentioned a couple times now, we actually exclude the comparison between the IAP, so that removes that difficulty. But I'll read part of my answer. A side-by-side comparison of just the accrual rate is very simple to qualify. This benefit is 140% more valuable, 2.8% divided by 2%. Other plan features, such as the value of the normal form of benefit of payment of benefits, are also quantifiable using actuarial techniques. So there are some plan designs which have a different form of payment, and we have some specialized actuarial software that will allow us to compare the relative value of different forms of payment. I'll keep going with the questions. Additional questions. How does FPDR participate in testing? Does FPDR have any influence as to how the test is conducted? Can FPDR review the test results before they are presented to the PERS board? The test is performed by an actuary retained by the board. That's me. And we provide the report to PERS. So I don't believe that FPDR can review the test results before they are presented to the board. The question about how FPDR participates in the testing, that is at first limited to providing any additional information that is deemed necessary by the actuary. The question, if FPDR failed an ETOB test, who would it impact? Would there be any impact to FPDR members already retired, or just those FPDR members still working? The answer is that if they failed the test, if the plan were amended to comply with the equal to or better than requirement, it states that the amendment would be retroactive to the valuation date. So the valuation date is 12/31/2020, and there would be no impact to any FPDR member who retired before this date. Only actively employee members accruing benefits as of the date would be affected. So if you fail the ETOB test, you have an option to amend the plan to increase benefits, but that would only affect people who were actively accruing at the time of the test. Question, what are the options if FPDR were to ever fail an ETOB test? If the board were to deny FPDR's petition for exemption from participating in PERS, they could choose to participate in PERS or could amend the plan. And the amended plan would again be tested for equal to or better than status. Question, who has the authority to change the ETOB test requirements? And for that, I would refer you to the PERS board and the Oregon Secretary of State for questions about that process.
And I'll just follow up a little bit because We welcome any insight that you had. So if board members or the board as a whole feels that it's appropriate to amend the procedures and the rules governing the ETOB process, I would recommend submitting a letter to that effect with any proposals to the PERS board, and our staff will forward and incorporate that into the regular procedures of our board. Alterations. Statute, as I understand it, requires this certification, which again, as Aaron mentioned, is very much an up or down vote for each individual plan. It either passes ETOB and thus qualifies to be exempt from participation in PERS, or it does not. And he went into some of the options if it does not qualify for this exemption. But obviously, if there are any inadequacies, if there are concerns expressed by the board, I perceive that would receive some due weight, and PERS would direct agency staff to make appropriate amendments to reflect those concerns.
Well, I can say for myself, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the time of both of you for coming down and explaining a bunch of these things. I think it's incumbent upon me certainly to understand this the best I possibly can, being this is the first time through the ETOB test as a trustee. It's very interesting. One thing that just sticks out to me at the end of this discussion, on page 104, the last thing, and I remember in a meeting in March, I think, when we first talked about this, Director Hutchinson saying that the evaluation came at 140% or so of the PERS value. And it said it here at the end that the benefits provided by the city are at least 140% the value of those provided by PERS, which is essentially this exact same ratio that was talked about earlier with your side-by-side comparison of just the accrual rate is very simple to quantify. It's 140%. So they seem to be basically the same. All these different things that were folded in, actuarial assumptions, this implicit benefit, it all ended up around 140%. I just wanted to point that out. That seems interesting, that essentially may be the foundational bottom line to this whole test.
I would agree that a large part just relies on that percentage that's available, the accrual rate. However, it was a coincidence that it's the same number.
And my understanding, and perhaps you can speak to this a bit more, Aaron, the actual comparison, if that's divided into components, both the service retirement portion was well in excess of 100%, as well as the disability portion being well in excess of 100% of comparable PERS. My understanding is that the relative value of the retirement portion was more than 100%, but less than 140%. And the relative value of the retirement or the disability portion was greater than 140%. And as he mentioned, that the 140% was kind of a coincidence. Is that more or less correct?
I would have to look at the details of our testing to confirm that. But they were both well above 100%. I would agree with that.
I'd like to add my thanks and appreciation to your discussion of the test in detail and responding to these individual questions. I think it's been very, very helpful to us. I mean, we've heard prior comments in the past, but this has been very thorough in terms of the review of the nitty-gritty of what is included, what's not included, and specifically what the requirements are, because that's been a bit of a confounding part in the past when a kind of logical comparison might say, well, why aren't Social Security benefits or why aren't taxation of certain benefits taken into consideration? It's important for us to understand that for purposes of this mandated requirement to test, there's rules for how it's being conducted and you're following the rules. So I really appreciate the clip, and that the IAP portion of plan is another example. So I really appreciate the clarification of those things. And then that makes it a separate matter should the plan members feel that there are issues relating to the comparability of their plan benefits to other PERS members that concern them, then that is a separate matter apart from this test and its results. So I want to thank you for all the clarifications and the quality of the test. Do we need to accept the results of this test, formally make a motion to do that, or has that been done already?
Catherine, I'd like to have just one last question for you before you go there. When is the next ETOB test scheduled?
No less than 12 years.
Yes, that current statute says that an
No more.
ETOB evaluation must be performed at least every 12 years. So that would require that to take place on or before 2034.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And again, Jake, to go back to a comment that you made there for the end about if FPDR felt that there were aspects to the testing requirements themselves that were of concern to us, things that should be included that aren't. Are you saying that you feel that these are things that have any realistic possibility of change at the first level, or are we one of many, many voices and it's not likely that this is going to get revisited?
I would say it's somewhere in between those. There are currently 9 police and fire plans that are exempt from PERS participation. So obviously that's a small universe, and Portland FPDR is the largest of those 9 plans. Certainly concerns, especially as a board, that would be identified and addressed to the PERS board and or the Secretary of State would be taken seriously and considered, but I have no guarantee that they'd be adopted. But they would certainly be reviewed and given appropriate consideration.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions? I'm again, back to my original comment. Sam, do we need to make a formal motion to accept the results of the test, or is this administrative in nature?
This is just administrative for your information only, so no need to accept a report.
Okay, well, thank you again. I thought that was a very, very helpful.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, now that the ETOB presentation is over, Del Stevens has comments to make. Del, you want to come on up?
Del, did you want to give
Do you want to make a?
I would like to respond.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you have 3 minutes, and I'll start the timer momentarily.
Thank you for taking a question from the floor. I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this without making an accusation, but if in fact Portland does pass the equal to or better than test, how do you account for the fact that disabled people in Portland are required to pay IRS income taxes, and disabled people under PERS are relieved of that burden? It's an extreme hardship for disabled people to pay upwards of 30% of their disability income out in federal taxes. Was that taken into account when you did your equal to or better than study?
Del, we'll have them come up and answer your questions later.
Okay. Anyway, I am concerned with equity for our retired members. I'm in contact with a lot of them, and I know that a lot of them are suffering hardships. As I said before, the buying power of a disability pension is decreasing every year with our inflation rate. I understand how the COLA was established. I was part of the committee in 1989 that created our Tier 2 pension plan. However, it's not equitable today, and our members are in fact impaired from the disproportionate tax that they have to pay on their pension. And I don't understand why that is not part of the equal to or better than test. Could somebody from PERS respond to that, please?
I'll address the first part of the citizen's comment, and that is that the taxation of the benefit is not considered. And I understand that there are many people where the taxation of a benefit like that would be a burden. However, that's not part of the comparison in the test.
I would just echo that and just concede that perhaps the rules established for the conduct of ETOB are not perfect, but they are those which govern the process, and that process was followed. And part of that is that the taxation is not considered. One of the challenges philosophically, and again, this is my opinion, and perhaps I should withhold it, there are challenges with assessing the impact of taxation that require additional assumptions. Nevertheless, the ETOB guidance does explicitly exclude that consideration.
Okay, again, thank you very much for the follow-up answers for you.
All right. Chair McLeod, are we ready for the
We're
next
ready to, yes,
item?
we're ready to move on to tax anticipation notes.
All right. Just to state for the record, again, my name is Stacy Jones, and I am the FPDR Pension and Finance Manager. And I believe this is the only action item before the board today. Sorry, I keep looking up, because otherwise I feel like I'm just staring at Trustee McClary the whole time. Yeah, it's right up there and also to the side. So I'm kind of pivoting around. I believe this is our only action item today. This is our routine annual tax anticipation note issue, which the board always authorizes at their May meeting for borrowing in July or August. All three of you here today, you guys have all done this at least once, so hopefully you have some vague memory of this. I bet Trustee McLeod has more than a vague memory, since she has gone through this process many times. But just to refresh everyone's memory, we rely pretty much, I know you all know this, pretty much entirely on our property tax revenue to fund all of our benefits and administrative expenses. And our fiscal year starts on July 1st, but we don't get the majority of our property tax revenue until mid-November, when those first payments and those folks who are taking the option of paying in full when those payments start rolling in. So we are faced with the problem of funding our expenses from July 1st through mid-November. So every year we borrow money to bridge that gap by issuing something called tax anticipation notes, or what we lovingly refer to as TANs. Notes are just short-term bonds. And then we will pay them off in January after we have the majority of our tax revenue. So many local and state governments issue TANs. There's a very well-developed market for them. And they are, of course, tax exempt, which means that those who buy the TANs get to keep their interest earnings tax-free, which in turn means that we get charged less interest for issuing them. In addition to just being necessary from a cash flow perspective, let me also just remind the board that every year, at at least until this year. It has also been financially advantageous for the fund to issue TANs. And that is because we have always paid less interest on the TANs than we have earned on the funds in the city investment pool. And Trustee McLeod has heard me fret about this for years, and every year I say, well, that has always been the case, but this year it might not be the case. This year it might not, and I feel like I'm crying wolf, because then it always turns out that we do, we come up with some positive arbitrage. Well, this year is the first year, at least that I know of, where that did not happen. We paid 1.9% interest on our TANs, and for the 6 months we had those funds, we earned 1.2%. I mean, this would be on an annual basis. So I think that's the first time, it's the first time I'm aware of where we wound up not coming out ahead on the deal. It could have been worse. We took the advice of debt management and went with a private TANs placement with a private bank last year and took advantage of kind of a lag in interest rates between those two markets, between the banking markets and the municipal bond market. Would have been even worse if we had borrowed on the municipal bond market like we normally do. But all the same, we did wind up in that situation this year. I do think that this is an anomaly. I don't think it's the new normal. This has really been brought on by the very, kind of unprecedented interest rate environment that we've been in for the last couple of years. But I do want to let the board know that I wouldn't be surprised if that same situation repeated this year. And this is something that we're obviously going to be watching very closely. So for that reason, I am going to recommend repayment again in January. It used to be that we would hold the money as long as we could and pay it in June because we were making money. Well, now I'm really glad we repaid the funds in January since we were losing money, and I want to make sure that we repay again in January this year. So that is the plan. But whether it does or it doesn't come out ahead financially for us, it is still necessary from a cash flow perspective because we have to cover our expenses between mid-August, which is when we're going to run out of fund balance, and November 15th. A couple more things just to say before you all, I take your questions. We do plan to issue notes on the public municipal bond market again this year. We're not seeing that sort of reverse split between the public bond and the private bank loan rates that we were seeing last year. So we are pretty confident that issuing public notes will be less expensive, even after we consider that there are more administrative expenses associated with that, because we have to get a Moody's rating and we need closer involvement of bond counsel, and all those things cost money. But even considering that, we're confident it will be cheaper to go out to the public municipal bond market this year. We're planning to issue in August and repay in January, as I just said. And then let me talk about the dollar amounts. Let's see. Yes, so we budgeted for $38 million, and that is the borrowing amount that I'm asking the board to authorize today. We just completed our preliminary cash flow projections, and I think our low point on November 14th is going to be about -$30 million. And I'm going to borrow a bit extra, again, within the allowances that the IRS permits. So I'm thinking that we're going to borrow $33 to $34 million, but I'd like you to authorize the full $38 million so I have some flexibility, because we won't finalize that amount until June. And of course, the board wouldn't meet again until July. But we do need a final amount in June so that we can go through the whole preliminary offering statement process with bond counsel and get a rating from Moody's and all of those things in July. So we will continue to fine tune that amount, but right now I think it's going to be in the 33 to 34 million. And just for context, we issued 28 million last year in tax anticipation notes. Any questions that I can answer? No, I see Trustee Culp shaking his head. No, all right. Well, then I do need a resolution. I need the board to formally authorize Sam and I to borrow this money. I believe you have a resolution in your...
Number 549, do I have a motion to accept resolution 549 as presented?
I'll make a motion to accept resolution number 549 as written.
I will second it.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All right, thank you, Stacy.
All right, thank you very much, board. All right, so now moving on to, I think, kind of update and information items. I believe the expenditure report is up first, so I may as well just stay up here. The report in front of you, if you're looking at a physical paper copy, notice that it's been folded, because now we're at that point in the fiscal year where we try to save your eyesight and put it on slightly bigger paper. But this just goes through March, which was the month that had closed when we prepared this for you, so we could send it out to you 2 weeks earlier. April is closed now. The most unusual thing that's going on, and I think I've mentioned this before, is that you don't see any expenses on this report for PERS contribution reimbursements to police and fire, and those would be down under internal materials and services. And their FPDR 3 pension contributions. You can see that we have a budget of about $33 million and we have spent $0. But we do have that money flowing out in May now. Police and fire finally billed us. I think I mentioned that they've been consolidating some of those administrative backhouse functions, and there's been a lot bit of a delay in getting those billings to us. But when we got them, they were pretty much correct, and we didn't have to make too many changes to them. So that was a positive improvement. So we've got about $23 million of those reimbursements now, and the next time you see this report, you'll see that those are gone. The only other thing I might mention is that if you look at miscellaneous revenue, you'll see that we've got quite a bit more than we budgeted, and that is interest income on fund balance, but it is connected to the PERS contribution delay, and that we have been sitting on that $33 million in PERS contributions, which we're happy to pay as soon as they bill us, but we are collecting the interest for a little bit longer on that money than we had anticipated. And then in addition to that, interest rates have been higher than we budgeted for as well. Those are the only things I would point out, but are there any other questions about the expenditure? Are there any questions about the expenditure report?
It's kind of nice timing that they left those billings for so long because it helped offset the other. That's pretty good.
I know. We should thank them. The first time we had a negative, spread there, police and fire helped us out by not getting their billings over to us. Yeah, there we go. We'll think of it as citywide cooperation.
All right. Any questions? Okay. Thank you.
Next.
Okay, I've got a few informational items to go through. The first one is a legislative update. This legislative session, there were not a whole lot of bills that would directly impact FPDR. The legislature is still in session and will be potentially through the end of, or June 25th. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news, but the Republicans in the Senate have not participated in the Senate itself, so there's been no quorum since May 10th, and it looks like they're going all the way up to probably the week of June 20th before they come in, and then they're only going to come in and do budget bills. So I think any policy bills or other bills that are out in the system that require Senate approval will likely not get that approval this year. There is one bill that I was excited about that did get passed and has been signed into law by the governor, and that's House Bill 3111. This bill exempts from public disclosure personal information of employees and retirees maintained by a retirement system operated by a local government. That includes FPDR. This bill provides FPDR retirees with the same protection of confidential information that PERS retirees receive. Prior to this bill, our retirees did not have their personal information such as date of birth, addresses, email addresses, telephone numbers, and the like protected. Fortunately, we had only, over the past several years, have received only a couple minor requests for some of that information on an individual basis, and we've given the information that we felt was not confidential and refused to give the balance of that information. And fortunately, no one challenged us on that. We were also very fortunate that there was not what I would call a massive SISTA or data request. The city gets that often, PERS gets that often. If we had gotten that data request where they wanted all this information on all retirees, we would have refused to send that information, but more likely than not, we would have lost the appeal and would have been required by the state statute and state regulations to have released that information. This has been bothering me for 8 years. I've been trying to work with our government relations office and some other people in the legislature to get this wording put into a bill. A couple years ago, it got close, but the bill never progressed, and this year it progressed and was considered a high priority. Thanks to League of Oregon Cities, because this not only impacted us, it impacted other cities and stuff. So that's a big plus for saving our retirees confidential information with that. Next thing is vacant board positions. As you know, we have 2 vacant. The board chair is actually a designee of the mayor. So this is solely in the mayor's court to select his designee. The mayor's office, along with Commissioner Gonzalez's office, have started a search for possible designees to serve as the board chair. A couple names are banded around. One person withdrew. The other person, unfortunately, was a past police officer, and per the charter, the mayor's designee cannot be a member or former member of the FPDR plan. So I've checked with them earlier, or late last week. They're still in the process of identifying people. I am appreciative of the mayor's office this year because they jumped on this within a week of being told of the vacancy and have been working on it. In the past, sometimes this has taken 4 to 5 months before any action was taken. Then James Huang's position is available, citizen trustee. This one has to be nominated by the mayor and approved by council, but it isn't is not a delegate of the mayor. It's a different position. And I want to thank Catherine and James both have given me some names, and we're trying to wait to see if their people are interested. If they are, I'll pass those names on to the mayor's office for the final consideration of moving forward with that. And their only requirement is that they have to be living in the city limits of Portland. So we're moving ahead on those. We'll just keep our fingers crossed that we can get some names and get some people in here as quickly as possible. FPDR Strategic Plan, wanted to thank all of you for going through the interviews with me and discussions. Pre-game, who was interviewing both the staff, the fire and police liaisons, the fire and police chief, the union presidents, as well as a lot of active duty FPDR 2 members and FPDR 3 members, as well as retirees. All those interviews have been done. They've accumulated a lot of good input and recommendations. So we're now in the process of beginning to put all those recommendations and information together to create a strategic plan. Still on track for completing that by the end of June, and we'll share that with you and go over it with you in the July board meeting.
Quick question there, Sam.
Yep.
Will there be any information from the survey in the information they gathered from their interviews coming forth to the board to review?
They will share, I'll talk with them and confirm, but like to share this at a high level with people to do it. And they intentionally do some of it at a higher level, so there's no way that anybody in FPDR in the city can trace some of the comments back to particular people or individuals, because they really keep it, the anonymity is extremely important to do this. But yes, we'll talk about that in July, both of what we learned during the surveys as well as what we put together in the actual plan itself. The next part is the janitorial contract. Well, we moved into our building last July, and as part of the lease approval by City Council, we were required to seek out a janitorial service that uses union employees. The janitorial service used by our landlord is not union, so we were told we have to go out and find our own. In addition to that requirement, if we find our own, we have to find a vendor who is part of the Oregon Forward program, which is one designed to get vendors that help disadvantaged people get jobs. And so we have the 2 requirements. It has to be non-union, union employees and part of the Oregon Forward. Fortunately, we started negotiations with a firm that met both those requirements. And we were going back and forth for quite a while. Then it came till November, and they pulled out. There were a couple of requirements in there to do that they did not want to comply with, so they pulled out. So that put us back to ground zero, and so again, we have these 2 requirements. We the facilities went out and interviewed all the Oregon Ford approved vendors to see if anybody would be directly interested in coming to put in a bid for FPDR service, as well as are they union or non-union employees. That was unsuccessful in finding anybody who wanted to participate with us. So again, we went back and talked with Commissioner Gonzalez. He is a representative of the council who passed the ordinance requiring us to do this. And we had agreed, and actually I also talked with Commissioner Hardesty before the election. And the idea is, or still the intent is still to try to find union employees. So after doing more research, we went ahead and issued an RFP requesting for janitorial services using union labor. We have finally got the responses back here a week or so ago. The committee that's reviewing all the responses will have a recommendation probably next week on what to do. So again, we're not certain if any of them will qualify, meeting all of that, especially the union. Don't know until we have a chance to look at it and the committee makes their decision. So what we've been doing in the past, since July, has been using our landlord's janitorial service and paying extra for it. We will continue to do that until a decision is made. And should we not find a union vendor, we will probably stay with the landlord with it. It's a little bit cheaper to do, and it doesn't require us to do a contract because it's built into the lease of what we're doing. I've already run this by Commissioner Gonzalez's office, and he supports it. I'll run it past him again should we end up having to go that way to confirm to do it. So we will have made a lot of due diligence effort to meet both the state and the city requirement. And if the worst case fails and we can't find one, we'll stick with the landlord. If we do find one, we will have to do a contract. And the reason why I'm not asking you to authorize me to do a contract is we're nowhere near even starting negotiation on a contract. So at some point, I don't know, I'll just put this on in your head here, is that we may have to have an intermediate one subject Zoom board meeting to approve a contract between now and the July session. If that happens, I'll talk with you all and see if you're game for that. So it'll just be that one topic. And we will have probably the completed contract ready for you at that time. So any questions on the janitorial service? That's been one of those nightmare things that's taken us this long to get where we are, and I'm not certain we've got it resolved yet. So we'll keep plugging away with that. The last thing I have is a future meeting agenda item. So July, the janitorial contract approval there, then at the latest. Well, it assumes that we're going to do a contract, but I may try to get that done earlier if we need to. We'll roll out the strategic plan and do that with you. Due to some of the legislative updates, there's some bills changing workers' compensation, not impacting FPDR, but there's some things we like in those bills. So we're going to be talking about, do we want to change our administrative rules to match some of those bills that are going for workers' comp? And they're favorable to our members to do that. And so in July, if we go that route, we'll give you a high-level overview of what we're thinking, and then we'll tell you what the process is to make that happen. And if there are any other final legislative updates that are of import, we'll share them with you at that time. And in September, we have the state of FPDR. That's the year-end recap of what's gone on over the last fiscal year. And then we'll have potentially more on the administrative rules at that time. I don't know if we'll put them up for vote for the board. We may delay that to November just because the state of FPDR can sometimes be particularly long, and we'd like to make sure we don't shortchange any discussion on the rules. So that's where we are. I don't have anything else. Do you have any questions for me or Stacy or anybody else?
Are there any other future board agenda topics that any of the other trustees would like to see included?
Funny you should ask. Yes, actually, I apologize for speaking so much today, but there's a couple more things I'd like to bring up if that would be okay. The first is in regards to the ETOB test. I'm going through all this information about this pension side of the ETOB, and I've spoke to this briefly to Director Hutchinson. I would like for us to discuss the ability to do a similar test on the disability side of the FPDR versus this state system. I think it would be very worthwhile understanding some of the differences. I know I'm not an expert by any means on the state system, but I believe the claims are different. They're run differently. They're accepted differently. Benefits are different. I think it'd be worth having a third-party auditor, not an actuarial service, compare the benefits and the benefit structure.
You brought that up to me last board meeting or some other time, when we did the interviews with that to look at that.
Correct.
I have some information. I'll pull it together and send it to the board, because in 2005, in preparation for the 2007 charter change, as well in 2011 and 12, in preparation for the 2013 charter change, there were discussions on should FPDR move into the workers' compensation system. There were a lot of analysis and comparisons done at those times.
Okay.
So I'll share that with you. And again, if you want to go ahead and do some additional stuff, that's fine. And but I'll share it with you because it's pretty detailed. Bennett Hartman, who's been the law firm representing PFFA for quite a long time, they wrote their own version up on this, so I will share you what their report is. So you will have it, and it was under the idea of should we move into workers' compensation as part of the charter changes either in 2007 or 2013.
Okay.
And you know how it went. No, they were not proposed, and we did not get any pressure or recommendation from the unions or the union attorneys that we do make that change.
Right. I do recall reading some of that report from 2006.
Yeah.
But it may well be that that was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
Maybe worth a while, another.
So I'll share all that
analysis.
information with you. I found it in my file folder, getting it scanned, and so I can share it to you. There's quite a few documents on that'll outline it, and if there's anything else you think you need at this point, we can talk. What we can do is we'll find a way in the future meetings to discuss this. Okay.
And my last thing, hopefully my last, this may be directed somewhat towards Mr. Donauer. Would be interested in getting some counsel and some expert advice on perhaps some of the information we're getting from public comment from Mr. Matches. It seems to be different information than we're getting from the different places, and not having anywhere else to get the expert advice. I'd like to get some clarification on what exactly.
Do you know what, because he's talked over several points, too,
Specifically today, he was saying that the information that we got at their last meeting was incorrect.
Okay.
From our experts. So I just would like, it's hard to get correct information, I know sometimes, and some of it may be interpretation, but if there's any way to clarify that.
Okay.
And that may be dependent on him presenting some more specific information, but I would like to be able to address his issues if we are at all able to.
Okay, because he's brought up several issues, but we were specifically looking at the last
ASOP
discussion.
number 4.
Yeah.
And specifically on that, the matter of whether the actuarial analysis we've been getting constitutes a funding valuation as defined in the standards of practice.
Okay.
And if so, is what we've been getting compliant with what is a funding valuation is required to provide. So I think that was the issue at hand. There were other issues about, the benefits of pre-funding versus not pre-funding, but kind of behind that, he had raised the issue of whether or not we were the actual information we were being provided was compliant with this ASOP 4. So it sounds like that was the primary issue being raised in the last presentation and the one in the comment.
I know you guys are asking Lauren this question, but I'll just come back up because I just went to a workshop on ASAP 4 at our professional association this morning. And I was able to talk to the person who led it, he's the chair of the public practice for Siegel, and talk to him about this issue, and he completely agrees with Milliman. And it's one of those things, though, it's a new standard, and I think until people have rolled it out into practice and have a lot of or if Milliman or Trustee McLeod or somebody wants to go and get one of those advisory opinions, you could, but we're also a super unique plan. But I think Lauren had already shared his opinion that it is not, a funding valuation. That's the opinion of Milliman. It's the opinion of the folks I talked to at the workshop this morning. But You know, it also is, it's not that big of a deal to ask Milliman to calculate that number if you guys want it. I know Lauren disagrees with me and thinks that we can't pay for that, but I do not think it would be a significant cost. I mean, it's just a number. And it's part of what they do for every other plan. So if the board really wants that number, I personally don't think there's any issue with obtaining that number. But anyway.
Hearing my name uttered in vain. Lauren Downhour, outside Loop Council. We did look at it, and we looked at ASOP 4. We looked at the language of ASOP 4. I spoke with Milliman about what was involved with the valuation and concluded on the plain language of ASOP 4, it's not a funding valuation. The purpose is not to determine funding of the plan. The purpose is to understand the impact of the plan's benefit levels on the levy adequacy, which doesn't affect the funding of the plan. It affects it affects the city's general fund, right? Where do they come up with the money to pay for the benefits? So it's not, strictly speaking, a funding question. And unfortunately, I disagree with it not being a big deal. Yes, it's just numbers, but if it's a funding valuation, somebody needs to come up with a bunch of funding assumptions. Right now, we don't have any funding assumptions because we're not a funded plan. So even if if we were a funded plan, and we're doing this levy adequacy study, and we're like, well, let's just run it and see what happens, we would have a set of funding assumptions that we could apply to it, but we don't. So somebody would have to come up with a complete set of, frankly, arbitrary funding assumptions that are meaningless because we're an unfunded plan. So I'll dust off the work I did when this question first came up just to double check myself. And we can talk about it at the next meeting just to touch base. But I was pretty confident that we were not doing anything that implicated a funding valuation.
Yeah. And I completely share Lauren's confidence. And I didn't mean to be dismissive of Lauren disagrees with me, because he disagrees with me for a valid reason, which is that the board should not waste resources and it would cost money to have Milliman do this for all the reasons that Lauren said.
Well, it would cost money, and the results depend completely on the funding valuation assumptions, which are completely arbitrary and at the end of the day meaningless for this fund. So you spend a bunch of money on a number that doesn't mean anything.
So just say we go through this and make the assumptions, how would this board use that number? How would it influence decisions made by the board?
Well, that's the next question. It's really not a fun decision in terms of should this plan stop being pay-as-you-go. That's a decision up at City Council.
Right.
So in any event, I just wanted to share that, I did have another, independent opportunity to yet again validate the professional opinion of Lauren, of our actuaries at Milliman, of myself, with several other folks who are national experts on this topic, and that they felt the same. They were, a little surprised we were having actuaries do the levy adequacy analysis, because it's a financial analysis, it's not an actuarial analysis. So, maybe that's part of the confusion with Mr. Metches as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is financial in nature, but there are other valuations that are non-funding valuations that ASOP 4 recognizes, right?
Yep, we talked quite a bit about that this morning.
So what I said out here, so Lauren, you will go through and dust off your thinking.
I'm going to look at what I concluded
and be prepared to come back in
because he said, among
July.
other things, that if you look at the very definition of a funding valuation, and like the question answers itself, or something to that effect. So I'm going to go back and look at that. Just, did I miss something? I'm not perfect. I will look, but I was pretty confident at the time that we were in firm footing.
So I'll just put you on just for this one, the July 4th meeting, just so you can come in and do a recap of what your opinion is for everybody.
Happy to do that.
But, and I think part of where I was going with on the, like Lauren, when we think about how much money we're spending, I mean, we're also spending a lot of, Lauren isn't free either. I would just like to point out.
Well, I'm cheaper than a funding
You're
valuation.
cheaper than a funding valuation, but, at some point, we are also spending staff resources addressing what is kind of like a meaningless question. And so if if it's cheaper to just answer the meaningless question, then I think that is like,
And to argue it.
you know,
Right.
intellectually where I'm coming from is, well, is it going to be cheaper to just ask the Milliman to produce that number than to continue to talk about this, you know, endlessly and all
And
that.
it may be, you know, depending on how long it takes them to do the actual valuation, it may be cheaper than having me go over the same row again and again and again.
Yeah, if you have to
But
keep
if
revisiting.
they have to come up with a set of assumptions, and that requires a fair amount of work,
Yes.
you know, that,
Yes.
yeah.
The first time they do it, it would be much more expensive than the other
Exactly.
times. Yes.
And again, if the result is meaningless.
Yes.
And that was an important question you asked. What's the offshoot of having and I mean, the purpose of a funding valuation, as I understand it, is to have an actuarially determined contribution level for funding the plan, what amount would be recommended if you were funding the plan. And that when you have that information, what do you do with it? Well, the logical consequence of what earlier presentations were about were the value of pre-funding the plan potentially in order to build up assets and have things pre-funded and better match those kinds of things to the timing of benefits, that those things are out of this board's sphere of responsibility. And so whether or not it's meaningful for us to get that information, city council would need to be interested in wanting to get that information. And I'm not sure if they've expressed that interest.
I agree.
Agree.
Okay, thank you on that one. Those were good topics. I'm not sure, Trustee McClary, I was interested in your comments about the ETOB type, whether, you know, ETOB modified disability only discussion. Should we put it on as a discussion item for the next board meeting or two, wherever it seems like we've got time available to discuss it further? I'm not sure it's fully fleshed out in my understanding. But can I?
What I'd like to do is share that information with you about what's been done in the past, and then potentially to have some discussion of what additional information that's not in those reports. And again, this is one of where you're going to be looking at apples and rocks, comparing the two plans. And the statute and, see my fingers here anywhere, there we go, pull them in the picture. So the statute and the administrative rules for workers' comp is this big. For FPDR, it's this big. So you're comparing an awful lot of stuff between the two plans. And so, you know, what's going to be valuable difference and what's going to not be like. So I want to defer back to some of the studies that were done in 2005 and 2011, just to show you what other people have come up with. And if you want more information, we can go from there.
Okay. And then I would like to, again, but with the idea that it not occur on a board meeting prior to us having a full board, is to get back to a discussion of whether and how we might, you know, get some action behind what are some expressed frustrations about the true comparability of the PERS versus tier 2 plan benefits, as opposed to what the ETOB test provides for administratively, kind of true comparability and or other benefit issues that are on the table, without necessarily concluding that this board or a committee with this is going to take that task on, but rather just discuss and decide how best to, for anyone that has concerns in that area, how best to help that process along, while also not accepting that this board or a subgroup of this board is going to tackle that on its own. So, but I'd like that for a future meeting topic, but not until we have a full board.
I'd like that too.
Okay. Any other topics for the future we want to throw out there now, or are we ready to consider moving on to something else today? All right, then I'm going to adjourn the meeting then and thank everybody for presentations and comments. And I thought it was a very productive meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're adjourned.